There are moments in life when a single phone call can change everything. It can transform years of pain into instantaneous joy. It can take a dream you had tucked away so deeply that you almost forgot it existed, and bring it to life so suddenly that you can barely breathe. For Seth Curry, that moment arrived on a late August afternoon when his phone rang with a number he didn't immediately recognize. You can tell that something extraordinary is about to happen when your heart starts racing, before you even know why, as if your body knows that the next words will change your life forever. Seth, this is Bob Myers from the Golden State Warriors. The world stopped. Seth Curry had received calls from NBA teams before. He had negotiated contracts, discussed offers, navigated the complex world of professional basketball for years. But this call was different, because the Warriors weren't just another team. The Warriors were Steph's team. "We would like to offer you a contract to join us," Bob continued, "to play alongside your brother." It was impossible not to feel the emotional weight of those words. Play alongside Steph, not against him. Not on opposing teams separated by professional rivalry, but together, finally together. Seth tried to respond, but discovered that his throat had completely closed. Tears he didn't expect began forming in his eyes, because that offer wasn't just about basketball, or money or career. It was about a dream he had carried since childhood. Naturally, this leads us to understand the depth of what that call meant. To comprehend, we need to go back decades, to two boys in a backyard, dreaming together about the future. Seth was 6 years old when he first said, "One day we're going to play on the same team, Steph. You and me. We're going to be champions together." Steph, then 8 years old, had smiled and messed up his younger brother's hair. "Of course we will, man. You and me against the world." It was an innocent promise made by children who didn't understand how the world worked, who didn't know that the NBA doesn't operate based on fraternal dreams. The teams don't select players to keep brothers together. But it was a dream that Seth kept in his heart, like a secret treasure. Years passed. The brothers grew up. Both became exceptional players. And then came the moment when their trajectories divided in ways that 6-year-old boy had never imagined. Steph was selected by the Warriors in 2009. Seth watched that moment with genuine pride, but also with a pang of pain he never admitted aloud, because he knew that the childhood dream was becoming more distant with each step Steph took toward greatness. How is it possible to carry pride and loss at the same time? Seth continued his own journey. Smaller colleges, development leagues, finally the NBA, but always on different teams, always as adversaries when they faced each other. And each time Seth prepared to play against the Warriors, against Steph, something hurt deeply inside him. It wasn't just professional competition. It was the constant reminder that the childhood dream had died somewhere along the way. There was one specific game years earlier that Seth could never forget. He was playing for the Dallas Mavericks against the Warriors. It was just another regular season game for most people, but for Seth, it was the game where he realized how much that dream still mattered. He was on the warm-up bench before the game started, watching Steph across the court. Steph was laughing with teammates, completely at ease, surrounded by players who had become his professional family. And Seth felt a loneliness so deep it almost suffocated him. Because he wanted to be there, not in someone else's place, but beside his brother, sharing those moments, being part of that family. Have you ever wondered what it's like to spend years competing against the one person you always dreamed of competing alongside? After that, game. Seth and Steph hugged briefly at center court as they always did, exchanged a few polite words, smiled for the cameras. But when Seth returned to the visiting locker room alone, he let the mask drop for a moment and allowed himself to feel the complete truth. He no longer wanted to be Steph's opponent. He wanted to be his teammate. But that seemed impossible. Steph was the Warriors' ultimate star. Seth was on his 5th team in 6 years. The chances of their trajectories aligning were astronomical. So Seth did what he had done for years, swallowed that impossible desire, and moved forward. Focused on his own career, on proving his worth, on building his own identity separate from Steph. What's most striking is how Seth never spoke about that desire with anyone. Not with Steph, not with his parents, not even with his wife. It was as if speaking about it aloud made the impossibility more real, more painful. But on quiet nights, when he was alone with his thoughts, Seth still allowed himself to imagine. Imagine what it would be like to wear the same uniform as Steph, share the same locker room, celebrate victories together, instead of on opposite sides. It was a dream so deep that he barely admitted to himself that he still carried it. And then, on that late August afternoon, his phone rang, and Bob Myers said words that seemed impossible. "We would like to offer you a contract to join us, to play alongside your brother." Naturally, this leads us to the moment when Seth had to make a decision, because NBA contracts aren't simple. There were financial details to consider, questions about role on the team, playing time guarantees. But for Seth, none of that really mattered. Because this wasn't a career decision. It was a decision about fulfilling a dream he had carried for nearly 3 decades. "I need time to think," Seth finally managed to tell Bob Myers, his voice still choked with emotion. But it was a lie. He didn't need time. He knew the answer before the question was even finished being asked. He was going to the Warriors, going to fulfill that 6-year-old boy's dream, going to finally play alongside Steph. In the hours that followed that call, Seth tried to process the whirlwind of emotions: joy, relief, gratitude, and something deeper that he could barely name. It was the feeling that something that had been broken for years was finally being fixed, that the division that existed between him and Steph, not a division of love or respect, but a geographical and professional division that always seemed wrong, was finally ending. It was impossible not to notice how that moment validated decades of perseverance, because Seth could have given up on basketball years ago when it became clear he would never be as famous as Steph. Could have chosen another path to avoid the constant comparisons. But he continued. And now, that persistence was about to be rewarded in the most profound way possible. Seth spent 2 days reviewing the contract details, talked to his agent, discussed logistics. But in his heart, the decision had already been made from the first second. On the second day, he finally signed. His hand trembled as he put his signature on the paper. Not from nervousness about the decision, but from pure emotion about what that signature represented. He was officially a Golden State Warrior, officially Steph's teammate, officially about to fulfill the dream he had carried since 6 years old. But there was one thing he needed to do before any public announcement, before social media posts or press conferences, before the world knew. He needed to call Steph, needed to hear his brother's voice, needed to share that moment the only way that mattered, directly, honestly, without filters or audiences. Have you ever wondered how much emotional weight a single phone call can carry? Seth was about to find out, because the call he was about to make would be one of the most emotional of his life. The words he would leave not only Steph speechless, but would eventually touch millions of people around the world. That same evening, after signing the contract and returning home, Seth knew he couldn't wait, couldn't sleep, couldn't do anything until he shared that moment with the one person who truly understood what it meant. It was late afternoon when Seth finally gathered the courage to dial Steph's number. His hands were shaking. His heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. Tears were already forming even before Steph answered, because Seth knew that once he said the words aloud, once he shared that moment with Steph, the childhood dream would finally be real. And there was something so deeply significant, so emotionally overwhelming about that he could barely maintain his composure. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. And then Steph answered. "What's up, man?" And Seth opened his mouth to speak. But what came out wasn't words. It was a sob. A deep sob loaded with almost 3 decades of hope, pain, love, and finally, fulfillment. The moment had arrived, and the words Seth was about to say would change everything. "What's up, man?" Steph's voice sounded casual, carefree, completely unaware that the next few minutes would change both their lives in profound ways. Seth tried to respond, opened his mouth, but what came out wasn't a word. It was a sob. A deep, loaded sob that came from a place so deep inside him that even he didn't know it existed. "Seth? Seth, what happened? Are you okay?" Steph's voice instantly changed from casual to concerned. "Man, talk to me. What's going on?" It was impossible not to feel the growing panic in Steph's voice, because in nearly 3 decades as brothers, he had rarely heard Seth cry like this, and certainly never on a call out of nowhere. Seth took a deep breath, trying desperately to control the emotions that threatened to completely overwhelm him. But he couldn't. The tears kept falling, his breathing was choppy, and his voice broke with each attempt to speak. "Steph, Seth tried, but the emotion was so overwhelming that the words simply wouldn't come out. "Easy, man. Easy. Breathe," Steph said, his own voice now loaded with emotion from hearing his younger brother so destroyed. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Just breathe and tell me what happened." You can tell that a moment is about to become historic when the loaded silence between two people contains more emotion than 1,000 words could express. Seth cleared his throat, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, tried to gather enough composure to say what he needed to say. And then, with a voice so broken it was almost unrecognizable, he finally managed. "Steph, I signed with the Warriors." Absolute silence from the other end of the line. Seth continued, the words now flowing along with the tears. "We're going to play together, man. You and me. Finally. After all these years." And then he couldn't continue anymore because the sobs returned with full force. What's most striking is what happened next, because from the other end of the line, Seth Curry, the 2-time most valuable player, multiple champion, one of the most composed athletes under pressure the world has ever seen, began crying too. "Seth, are you serious?" Steph's voice was as broken as Seth's. You really signed with us?" "Yes," Seth managed to say through tears. "I signed today. We're going to finally fulfill that dream, Steph. Remember? When we were kids, you and I said that one day we'd play together." Steph sobbed audibly. "I remember. Of course I remember. I never forgot." How is it possible that a phone call between two brothers, contains so many decades of unexpressed emotion? I've waited for this my whole life, Seth confessed, his voice raw with vulnerability. Every time I played against you, every time I was on the other side of the court, I just wanted to be by your side. Not against you, by your side. I know, Steph said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt the same way, man. Every time we played against each other, a part of me wished things were different, that we could be teammates instead of opponents. Seth wiped his eyes again, but it was useless. The tears kept coming. You know how many times I dreamed about this? How many nights I stayed awake imagining what it would be like to wear the same uniform as you? Be in the same locker, room, celebrate victories together. I know, Steph repeated, because I did the same thing. Naturally, this leads us to the heart of the conversation that was breaking hearts, even though no one besides the two of them could hear it. Because what came next was honesty so raw, so vulnerable, that it completely transcended basketball or sports. You know what's craziest? Seth said, laughing through the tears. I have a career in the NBA. I fulfilled a dream that billions of people will never achieve. But I always felt something was missing, and now I know what it was. What? Steph asked gently. It was you, Seth said simply. You were missing. I always wanted to share this with you. Not just the fame or the games, but the moments, the team flights, the locker room jokes, the celebrations, all of it. The line went silent for a moment, except for the sounds of both brothers crying softly. Seth, Steph finally said, I need to tell you something I never told you. What? When you made it to the NBA. When you finally made it, after all that hard work. I was so proud I cried. But I was also sad. Because I knew it meant we'd probably play against each other instead of together. And that hurt in a way I never admitted to anyone. Have you ever wondered how much unexpressed love can exist between two people who always felt it, but rarely articulated it? Why didn't you ever tell me? Seth asked. For the same reason you never told me about your dream of playing together, Steph replied. Because it seemed impossible. And talking about impossible things only makes the impossibility more painful. Seth laughed through the tears. But it wasn't impossible. It was just waiting for the right moment. It was, Steph agreed. And that moment is now. What's most striking is how that conversation continued for more than an hour. Not about contracts or basketball or game strategies, but about memories. About moments that meant everything. About the journey that brought them there. Seth told about the specific game years ago when he realized how much he wanted to be on Steph's team. Steph confessed that there were moments when he wished the Warriors could sign Seth, but didn't know if it would happen. They laughed, remembering childhood games in the backyard, cried remembering difficult moments when they were separated, dreamed aloud about what it would be like to finally be on the same team. You know what's going to be strangest? Steph said at one point. Not having to play defense against you. Not having to try to stop your shots. Seth laughed. You know what's going to be best? Finally being able to celebrate your baskets instead of having to pretend I don't care when you shoot against my team. You pretended not to care? Steph teased gently. Always, Seth admitted. But inside, part of me was proud every time, even when I shouldn't have been. It was impossible not to notice the depth of the bond that conversation revealed. Because despite years on opposing teams, despite all the complexity Seth had carried about living in Steph's shadow, the love between them had never wavered. Seth, Steph said, his voice getting serious. I want you to know something. What? This isn't just me fulfilling my dream of playing with you. It's also you giving me a gift. Because playing alongside my younger brother, someone I love and respect deeply, that's going to make every game more meaningful. Seth felt new tears forming. You really feel that way? With every part of my being, Steph said with absolute conviction. You're not coming to my team, man. You're coming to our team, and I couldn't be happier. Naturally, this leads us to the moment when both realized that conversation needed to eventually end, but neither wanted to hang up. Because there was something magical happening in that telephone space, a connection so deep and true that interrupting it seemed wrong. I should let you go, Seth finally said, though each word cost him. Or, Steph suggested, you could come here. Now, let's celebrate this right, in person. Seth checked the time. It was almost 8 in the evening. Are you sure? It's already late. Seth, Steph interrupted. My younger brother just fulfilled our childhood dream. Just gave me the news that will change our lives. Do you really think I'm just going to hang up and go to sleep? Seth laughed through the tears. I'm coming. I'll be waiting, Steph said, and then, right before hanging up, added, and Seth? Yes? Welcome home, man. Welcome home. The line disconnected, but the impact of that conversation was just beginning to unfold. Because what Seth and Steph didn't know was that this call, that private moment of profound vulnerability between two brothers, was about to become public in a way neither of them anticipated. And when the world discovered about that call, when people heard the words that were said, when they witnessed the raw emotion those two men shared, hearts would be broken and healed simultaneously around the entire world. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't about great athletic feats or impossible victories. They're about love, fraternal love so deep it survives years of separation and finally finds its way back to where it always belonged, together. There are secrets that are kept by choice, and there are moments so profound, so loaded with genuine emotion, that the universe conspires to share them with the world. The call between Seth and Steph Curry belonged to the second category. The official announcement of the signing was scheduled to happen a week later, giving time for Seth to organize the move and for the Warriors to prepare the official presentation. But 3 days after that emotional conversation with Steph, Seth was at home when his phone exploded with notifications. Hundreds of them. Thousands. In a matter of minutes. His heart stopped because he instantly recognized what was happening. Somehow, the story of the call had leaked. Not the complete details, but enough for the world to know that something extraordinary had happened between the Curry brothers. And then he saw it. A sports journalist had posted, sources say that when Seth Curry called Steph to tell him about signing with Warriors, both cried for an hour on the phone. Seth reportedly said, I've waited for this my whole life. If that doesn't move you, you don't have a heart. The post had 3 million views in an hour. You can tell that something touched the core of humanity when the reaction isn't debate or division, but a massive wave of shared collective emotion. The comments were different from anything Seth had seen before in his career. They weren't about statistics or technical analysis or performance predictions. They were digital tears, vulnerable confessions, personal stories. I don't watch basketball in my life, but this made me cry at work. My brother and I have been separated for years, and this reminded me of what I'm missing. My older brother died before we fulfilled our dream of opening a business together. Seeing Seth and Steph fulfilling theirs completely destroyed me. Cherish every moment, Curry brothers. I haven't spoken to my brother in 5 years because of stupid stuff. I just called him crying. Thank you for reminding me what really matters. It was impossible not to feel how that moment had completely transcended sports. It wasn't about basketball. It was about the universality of fraternal love, of shared dreams, of connections that survive time and distance. Naturally, this leads us to what happened when more details of the conversation began to emerge. Because in an era of social media and instant information, secrets rarely remain secret for very long. A sports podcast managed an interview with someone close to the situation, and what was revealed made the entire world stop to listen. Seth wasn't just crying, the source revealed. He was sobbing, like that deep crying that comes from decades of repressed emotion. And Steph on the other side was equally destroyed. The call lasted more than an hour because neither of them could hang up. The podcast host, a man known for his professional composure, had to pause the recording because he started crying. "Sorry," he told listeners. "It's just, this is so pure, so real. In a world of poses and performances, this is genuine love." The episode was downloaded 10 to either 1 million times in the first 24 hours. What's most striking is how the story began to reveal layers of depth that the public had never considered. Journalists started researching the complete history of the Curry brothers, and what they discovered completely transformed the narrative. A detailed article revealed Seth Curry played against Steph 15 times in his NBA career. After each game, regardless of the result, Seth would go to the visiting locker room and be alone for 10 minutes. Teammates said he seemed to be processing something deep. Another reporter discovered Steph Curry kept detailed statistics of each of Seth's games, not just against the Warriors, but against all teams. He would watch recordings of Seth's games and send text messages with analysis and praise. Seth saved every message. How is it possible that two people can be so connected even when separated by professional rivalry? The answer was becoming clear to millions. Because true love between brothers isn't broken by external circumstances. It can be tested, stretched, complicated, but deep down, it remains intact. Celebrities began sharing the story. Not just athletes, but actors, musicians, people from all fields who had siblings and understood that special bond. A famous actor posted an old photo of him and his brother. "The Curry story reminded me why family is everything. I'm going to call my brother now." A singer shared, "My sister and I had separate careers for years, but recently we decided to collaborate on a project. Seeing Seth and Steph shows me we made the right choice. Together is always better." Naturally, this leads us to Seth and Steph's reactions when they realized their private moment had become so massively public. Steph was the first to speak publicly, posting an old photo of them in the backyard as children. That 6-year-old boy never stopped dreaming about playing alongside his older brother. And now, almost 30 years later, the dream becomes reality. "Seth, you're not coming to my team. We're building our team together. I love you, man." The post had 50 million interactions in less than a day. Seth waited a few hours before responding publicly, and when he finally posted, his words made the world cry again. "For everyone asking if the story about me crying on the phone with Steph is true, yes, it's 100% true, and I'm not ashamed of it. Because that call wasn't just about basketball or contracts. It was about two Brothers who grew up dreaming together and finally having the chance to fulfill that dream. If that makes me too emotional, so be it. Because some things are too important to hide. He continued, for the brothers out there who are separated, whether by distance or by stupid stuff, call. Make peace. Life is too short for pride. I almost lost years with my brother because of separate careers. Don't let anything separate you from the people you love. What's most striking is how that post initiated a movement on social media. The hashtag #CallYourSibling began to go viral. Millions of people sharing photos with siblings, telling reconciliation stories, posting videos of emotional calls. A woman posted a video of her calling the sister she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. The Curry story gave me courage. We just cried together for an hour on the phone. We're going to meet next week. Thank you, Seth and Steph, for showing me it's never too late. A man shared, my brother and I fought over our parents' inheritance division. We haven't spoken for 2 years. Today, I called. We cried. We asked for forgiveness. We scheduled a barbecue. Life is more important than money. Have you ever wondered how a private moment between two people can create waves of healing in millions? Family therapists reported a dramatic increase in siblings seeking reconciliation. The Curry story gave permission for people to admit they miss their siblings, a therapist explained. Many carry pride or hurt, but seeing two successful men being so vulnerable created space for others to do the same. Churches used the story in sermons, schools in classes about family, counselors in sessions about relationships. The call between Seth and Steph had become much more than a sports moment. It had become a cultural symbol of fraternal love. But perhaps the most touching reaction came from people who didn't have siblings, but wished they did. Their stories revealed a profound truth. We all yearn for that kind of deep connection with someone. I'm an only child, a man wrote, but the Curry story made me realize I can have that kind of bond with my best friend. I called him and said he's like a brother to me. He cried. I cried. Thank you for teaching me that family is who we choose too. It was impossible not to notice how that moment had revealed something fundamental about the human condition. We all need connection. We all yearn to be seen, known, loved by someone who understands us completely. And Seth and Steph Curry had modeled exactly that. Not perfectly. They had years of complexity, separation, unexpressed pain. But eventually, they chose vulnerability. They chose honesty. They chose each other. With the leak of the story and the massive public reaction, the Warriors decided to move up the official announcement. 2 days after the first posts went viral, they scheduled a joint press conference. Naturally, this leads us to the moment a few days later, when Seth and Steph finally appeared together in public for the first time since the signing. It was a joint press conference at the Warriors, but it felt more like a family reunion than a professional event. When they entered the room together, wearing Warriors uniforms, the ovation was deafening. Journalists, professionals trained to maintain objectivity, were applauding on their feet, some crying openly. You can imagine, Steph said with a smile through tears, that this is the most emotional press conference I've ever given, and I've won championships. The room laughed through their own tears. Seth was trying to maintain composure but failing completely. I had a speech prepared, he said, his voice already breaking. But forget it. All I want to say is, this is the happiest moment of my career. Not because it's the Warriors, but because it's with him. He pointed at Steph. The room exploded in applause again. And then Steph did something no one expected. He stood up, walked over to Seth, and hugged him. Not a quick hug for cameras. A real, long hug, where you could see both their shoulders shaking with emotion. There wasn't a dry eye in that room. The video of that hug was viewed 100 million times in the first 48 hours, because everyone who watched felt the absolute authenticity, the genuine emotion, the pure love between two brothers who were finally where they always belonged, together. The world had discovered the truth about that call, and, in the process, learned something fundamental about love, family, and the courage necessary to be vulnerable enough to fulfill dreams with the people who matter most. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because the legacy of that moment, of that tearful call, of that public embrace, would go far beyond basketball. It would touch generations in ways Seth and Steph could never have imagined. Seth Curry's first practice as a Golden State Warrior happened on a September morning. But for those present, it seemed more like a family gathering than a professional basketball training session. Seth entered the training gymnasium with his heart racing, not from nervousness about performance or about impressing new teammates, but because there, on the other side of the court, was Steph, wearing the same uniform, finally on the same team. You can tell that a moment transcends the ordinary when even professional athletes accustomed to greatness stop what they're doing to witness something special. When Seth and Steph saw each other for the first time in identical uniforms, both froze for a second. And then, simultaneously, they smiled through tears that began forming without permission. They walked toward each other at center court. They didn't run dramatically, like in movies. They walked slowly, as if they wanted to savor each step of that final journey until they were side by side. And when they finally met in the middle of the court, Steph placed his hand on Seth's shoulder. "We did it, man. That 6-year-old boy did it." Seth couldn't respond with words, just nodded, tears falling freely now. The rest of the team watched in respectful silence. Some teammates had their own eyes welling up, because even without knowing the whole story, they recognized the pure significance of that moment. It was impossible not to feel that something much bigger than basketball was happening. It was the fulfillment of a nearly 3-decade dream. It was two brothers who had spent years separated by professional circumstances, finally reunited. It was fraternal love, winning against all odds. Naturally, this leads us to Seth's first days and weeks as a warrior. And what close witnesses reported was a transformation not just in the brothers' relationship, but in the very essence of how Seth carried himself. Seth was always professional, a teammate shared, but when he joined the Warriors, there was a lightness to him I'd never seen before, like an invisible weight had been removed. He smiled more, laughed louder, seemed complete. An assistant coach observed, "The chemistry between Seth and Steph was instant, not just on court, but off it. They had constant conversations, laughed at inside jokes no one else understood, had lunch together almost every day. It was beautiful to see." What's most striking is how that dream fulfillment changed not just Seth, but Steph too. Because although Steph was already successful, already had championships and recognition, having Seth by his side added a layer of meaning he didn't know was missing. "Having Seth on the team reminds me daily why I started playing basketball," Steph said in an interview months later. "It wasn't for fame or money. It was because I loved the game and loved sharing it with my brother. Now I have both back." How is it possible that a single roster change could have such profound emotional impact? The answer was becoming clear, because this was never just about basketball, it was about restoration, about two brothers recovering lost years, about a childhood dream that had survived decades of impossibility and finally found its way to fulfillment. But perhaps the most profound impact wasn't on the Curry brothers themselves, but on the millions of families around the world who were inspired by their story. 1 year after Seth signed with the Warriors, a sociological study revealed something fascinating. A measurable 35% increase in adult siblings who had been separated initiating contact again. When asked what motivated them, the majority specifically cited the story of the Curry brothers. "I saw Seth and Steph fulfilling their dream," a man explained, "and realized my brother and I also had shared dreams we abandoned when our careers took us to different cities. So I called. We talked. We're planning to open that business we always dreamed about." A woman shared, "My sister and I fought over stupid stuff 5 years ago and stopped talking. The Curry story showed me life is too short for pride. Today, we're closer than ever." Have you ever wondered how many family reconciliations were initiated by two people who will never know most of those they inspired? Family therapists reported a dramatic change in how they approached cases of estranged siblings. Before the Curry story, a therapist explained, many siblings were ashamed to admit they missed each other. They thought it should be easy to stay in touch. But the Currys normalized something important. Even siblings who love each other can drift apart due to circumstances, and it's okay to admit you miss them and want to reconnect. Schools began incorporating the story into curricula about family relationships. Teachers used the video of the public embrace between Seth and Steph to teach about vulnerability, love, and the importance of expressing feelings. "My high school students are taught to be tough all the time," a teacher shared. "But when I show two professional athletes crying openly with each other, when I explain that this is real strength, not weakness, I see something change in their faces, especially in the boys." What's most striking is how the story transcended even blood ties. People without biological siblings began applying the lessons to deep friendships. "My best friend and I met at 5 years old," a man wrote. "We were always like brothers. But when our careers took us to different states, we let the friendship cool." The Bijou Curry story made me realize, if you love someone like family, fight to keep them in your life. Now we do weekly video calls and plan vacations together. Our friendship has never been stronger. Naturally, this leads us to understand that the true legacy wasn't just in inspiring reconnections, but in fundamentally changing how a generation thinks about male vulnerability and emotional expression. In a culture where men are often taught to hide emotions, Seth and Steph Curry had modeled something radically different. Two successful men being completely vulnerable with each other and with the world. The generation that grew up after the Curry story shows signs of greater emotional intelligence among men, a psychologist observed. They see that expressing love for their brothers isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing they can do. Support groups for men began using the Curry story as an example of healthy masculinity. "We need more models like the Curry brothers," a facilitator explained. "Men who are strong and emotionally available, successful and vulnerable, competitive and loving." Years after that tearful call, when Seth and Steph were interviewed about the legacy they hoped to leave, both consistently returned to the same theme. "I may have statistics and records," Seth said, "but if my legacy is that I gave permission for brothers around the world to admit they miss each other, that they showed it's never too late to fulfill dreams with those you love. That will mean more than anything I did on a court. Steph added, and if our legacy is that we changed the conversation about what it means to be a man, that we showed crying with your brother is braver than hiding emotions, then we used our platform for something that really matters. It was impossible not to notice the profound wisdom in those words, because in the end, trophies rust and records are broken. But impact on how people love and connect with their families, that reverberates through generations. What's most striking is how the story continued creating magical moments even years later. Each time Seth and Steph shared the court, there was a special energy that everyone felt. You could see it in their eyes, a commentator observed. They weren't just playing basketball, they were living a dream they'd kept for decades, and that joy was contagious to everyone around. A teammate described, there was a specific moment in a practice where Seth made a perfect assist to Steph. After the ball went in, they looked at each other and both started laughing. Not ordinary laughter. That deep laughter that comes from pure joy. Practice stopped because we were all laughing with them. It was impossible not to feel the magic. Have you ever wondered what the power is of two people living their authentic truth to inspire millions to do the same? The answer was manifesting in real time through countless stories. Brothers reconnecting, families healing, men learning that vulnerability is strength, people around the world being reminded that it's never too late to fulfill dreams with those we love. The story of the Curry brothers, a cultural historian wrote, will be remembered not as a sports story, but as a story about humanity, about two men who had the courage to be completely honest about what mattered to them, and in the process gave permission for millions to do the same. Years after that tearful call, when Seth's phone rang with the number that would change everything, the story was still being told and retold. Parents shared it with children, teachers with students, friends with each other. And each time it was told, the same theme emerged. True love requires vulnerability. Shared dreams are worth fighting for, and it's never, never too late to tell the people you love that they matter. Seth Curry called Steph crying that late August evening, and what he said, those simple but profound words, "We're going to play together, man. I've waited for this my whole life," moved millions because it touched something universal. We all have dreams with people we love. We all carry hopes of shared moments. We all yearn for connections so deep they survive time, distance, and circumstance. And Seth and Steph Curry reminded us of something fundamental. Those dreams are worth protecting. Those connections are worth fighting for. And when we finally fulfill dreams with those we love most, when we're finally where we always belonged, beside the people who make us complete, that moment is worth every tear, every year of waiting, every challenge overcome. That is the legacy, not of two basketball players who shared a court, but of two brothers who shared a dream, kept that dream alive through years of separation, and finally, had the courage and opportunity to fulfill it together. Seth's words on that call moved millions, but what really changed the world was what those words represented. Love so deep it survives everything. Hope so resilient it doesn't die. And the unshakable belief that shared dreams with those we love are the only ones that truly matter. Forever, the story will be remembered, not for games won or statistics accumulated, but for the moment when Seth Curry called Steph crying and said the words, "We all need the courage to say to the people we love, I've waited for this my whole life, And finally, we're together. And in the space of that simple but profound truth, millions of hearts were broken with emotion and healed by the reminder that true love always finds its way back home, forever.